You're listening to Interzone Pod. My name is Gareth Jelley. I'm the editor of Interzone and its online sister zine, IZ Digital. You can find out more about Interzone and subscribe at interzone.press, and you can read stories, reviews, and interviews for free at interzone.digital. Joining me on the show today is Matt Hill, whose novel, Lamb, is available now wherever books are sold. Hello, Matt Hill. Thank you very much for joining me on the show today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
Your new book, Lamb, is out in the world. How does it feel? You've had a kind of busy couple of weeks, busy month, I suppose. How does it feel to sort of see it in the hands of readers?
Yeah, really, really good. It's been about a 5-year process, this one. So seeing it finally out is both surreal and relieving and exciting. So yeah, it's been a bit of a mission, as they say. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's your fifth novel. Your third novel is Matt Hill. Some readers might know you as MT Hill. Mm-hmm. You started working on Lamb in 2018, mm-hmm. while you had those other novels out in the world.
Yep.
Or maybe kind of going out into the world. What connections do you see between Lamb and your earlier novels, The Folded Man, Graft, Zero Bomb, and The Breach?
I think that's a really good question. I think in some ways it is a continuation of those books, of my project, my wider project, if you like. I think it touches on some of the same stuff which I've always circled back to. Issues around, I suppose all of my stuff contains what you might call ordinary people faced with pretty extreme circumstances thrown into those circumstances. Mm-hmm. But with many of the same obsessions, including road trip elements, cars, vans, other kind of technology breaking down and other things falling to pieces, and the wider world in which they're set kind of coming apart at the seams as well.
With you said it was Lamb is the continuation of the project, but how do you feel you grew as a writer with this novel? How did it change you?
Well, I think there's you often hear it, a bit of a refrain that each novel feels like learning to write again. Mm-hmm. I think with Lamb in particular, Lamb has been various things up to and including 2 other novels entirely, and I think the process of redrafting, retrenching, having to kind of really think about what the novel would look like in its final shape. It changed so much, and it emerged out of a lot of ideas colliding. Originally, it was very much inspired by, and I've spoken about this elsewhere, but Svetlana Alexievich's Voices from Chernobyl, which I think was more recently retranslated and published as Chernobyl Prayer, which is an oral history of the 86 disaster. And I had, my original idea was to write a novel in which there had been a kind of bioweapon release in a small northern town in England. And I was going to tell it from the perspective of multiple voices in this kind of oral history style, but obviously it was all fictionalized. And you would slowly go through and have the sense that something much weirder was in play. That evolved into a kind of quite Brexity, thrillery situation where you had ultra-nationalist militiamen locking down a town. It was completely closed off, and you had Boyd, who did go on to become the main character, trying to escape the clutches of these, of this militia. And that was very much a kind of response to the kind of, well, I guess it was, the post-Brexit shock, the kind of the Trumpian stuff that was seizing politics. And, and I think I can trace a lot of that through it. It's been such a long gestation in a way that a lot of the world's ills have been poured into it. And obviously then the pandemic shaped it as well. But I think probably the most critical thing that happened was that I was going on submission with it, wasn't really getting anywhere. And a very honest and dear friend said to me, I think you need to relook at this and strip out that second novel that's kind of in there and focus it on what's actually at its core, which is this kind of intergenerational story of a son, a mother and a grandmother. and really focus on that. Which is what I did. So it was reduced from 140,000 words to what it is now, which is 85, 86 or whatever it is. And completely transformed as a result of that work. I mean, I literally I printed it out and rewrote it line by line. Did a fairly significant amount of work on it, which then obviously continued through edits and beyond to where we are now with it. So yeah, it's been a long old journey with it, but how has it changed me? Well, it's completely changed my approach to writing fiction, I think, and I'm hoping I've learned some good lessons from it. But yeah, we'll see.
You said you printed it all out,
yep,
and you wrote it back. Was that longhand, or were you still going into the computer?
Yeah, going into the computer. The rules were no copy and paste from old documents. Everything had to be written afresh. And sure enough, every line changed. I think every paragraph certainly changed, and the shape of it, just the texture of it changed. Everything did. It was quite an amazing. And so in some ways, I felt as though I'd wasted 4 novels getting to that conclusion. And I, there's a bit of me that said, well, right, I finally got it now. I'd quite like to go back and redo those other ones, but that's obviously not quite how it works, but maybe one day.
Yeah, I mean, both of the earlier ones, you can definitely sense maybe, something like the rusted shells of those maybe in parts of it, but they also sound kind of really intriguing in their own right. So yeah.
Oh yeah, there's definitely some stuff going on there. But yeah, I mean, that's it. I mean, I'm glad to say, or I try to make sure that with each project, with each new manuscript that I'm developing and learning new things and learning how to shed old habits and that kind of stuff, I do see it as, there's got to be some reward in the hours put in,
Yeah, sure. And I kind of imagine that if you're reading back your own work and then typing it back in, you're engaging with you really are kind of getting into your own prose, I imagine, sort of, because it's a different thing to maybe editing it on screen, actually, seeing it on paper and then copying it in. Did that sort of, kind of heighten your awareness of the things you were doing that you liked and the things that you were doing that you didn't like?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's quite hard to say, I like that bit, but I think you have a broader sense of what it might be like to read it as a reader, if that makes sense. I'm not sure what happens. There's some kind of, I've often said that when I'm actually in the drafting stage, we talk about the zone, we talk about being, in flow state and that kind of stuff. I find it quite a dissociative experience, really. I sometimes find myself emerging after a few hours of writing and go, what just happened? Whereas editing, obviously, you're much more engaged in what's there. Is it working? Does it, the classic things around, is it driving the plot? Does it make sense? Are there continuity problems? Does it feel like the pace is sagging or not sagging, or is it too pacey? All of those questions. But I think that there is a weird shift that happens when you know that someone's going to read it or is about to read it. So whether you're sending it off to an editor or an agent, or even that final pass as you realize it's going to go out into the world, there's a strange shift that happens where you could suddenly see things which perhaps you were either attached to, so the whole kill your darlings thing, or just there's bits where you go, I don't remember writing that bit, but I do actually quite like, I like that bit, and there are, it's like a weird perspective shift that happens, which is probably it's probably a fear response, because you go, actually, I have to stand by this bit now. There isn't an editor at this point. There isn't a proofreader at this point. This is purely on me doing this final read through, and I've got to stand by it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, completely. This is the last chance too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I had a question here which you've kind of answered already, which was the foundation stone for Lamb, and then the keystone. And I think you said that it sounds like that sort of that book about Chernobyl being kind of almost like a really critical bit of inspiration at the beginning, and then the family, focusing on that generational stuff being maybe the thing that kind of locked it all together. Is that kind of how, do you see a line still between those two? You know, that kind of that initial kind of laying the first stone, and okay, yeah, we need to focus on the family, and then it all just came together.
Yeah, I think it's possibly a mix of things. I think the family stuff was always in there. It was just a case of digging it out and bringing it more into the foreground and leaning into that, and that meant obviously doing more to kind of, I suppose, bump up or boost those themes, those sections, those interactions in later drafts. Certainly the weirdness of the Chernobyl stuff. I mean, that novel, I keep calling it a novel by mistake. It's not a novel, it's non-fiction, but it has a kind of strange novelistic quality. There are quite some very surreal images in there, of elderly villagers who've stayed behind and still tend to their vegetable plots, which are obviously completely irradiated, and they're pulling out these strange vegetables, misshapen, discoloured, and then other strange things. I think there's a scene in there where a family goes back to rescue their front door, which is a family heirloom, and they end up being chased through the forest by Soviet soldiers shooting at them. Just these really incredible little vignettes, which are just really quite haunting. And obviously, you've got the devastating stuff, and I think a lot of the images from the book were used in the more recent HBO miniseries, including the stuff around the soldiers hunting pets and stuff, which had obviously been left at home and were now roaming the streets. So all of that stuff kind of percolated, if you like. And I think some of that weirdness, that shift from the mundane, which is very much the kind of grounding of the book, into increasingly weird happenings, growths, things sprouting and developing and obviously falling apart as the novel kind of goes on. So yeah, I absolutely think there's a through line there. And, there are other influences, of course, but I think that definitely was the starting point. And I would still, I still rave about that book. I think it's an incredible book.
Oh yeah, no, I've heard. Did she win the Nobel Prize?
Yes, she did. Although she's a Belarusian journalist. I'm not sure whether it was for that project that she won the prize, but she's done a number of these. I think there's an one called Zinky Boys. I can't remember the others off the top of my head, but yeah, but a number of these oral histories, which again as a format, and I still may revisit because I think it's such a wonderful way to tell stories. Obviously, the other famous one being World War Z, Max Brooks, which is again a fictional zombie outbreak, but told in the format of an oral history.
Nina Allen wrote in a blog post that you're too young to have fully formed memories of Margaret Thatcher in government, but that your political and literary consciousness has clearly been shaped by and sort of shaped within the long and continuing fallout from the 1980s. And we've got fallout there, and we've got, that's a nice callback in a way to disasters.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting kind of quote, an observation, but I also wonder, if there was a list of other British things that may have shaped you. It might include Labour returning to power in 97. It might include protests against the Iraq war.
Yep.
Bioweapons there as well, I suppose. The fall of Labour, more wars. I've got a list here. Financial crisis and austerity. Brexit, which you've mentioned. The pandemic, which you've touched on. I kind of wonder, you surely have fully formed memories of many of those things.
All of them, yeah.
And kind of how would you describe the shape of your political and literary consciousness, and what do you think has shaped it?
I think it's an amazing question. I'd say my political awakening was probably sometime around the Iraq War. I would have been sort of 2003. That's right, isn't it? I would have been 18, 19, coming into university. I remember watching the first night on a very small television in my student flat, and new friends at the time being quite engaged in the anti-war movement. I wasn't at the time. I think I was probably maybe a little bit too young. Well, not too young, but I was too naive perhaps to understand the kind of wider implications. But But certainly, I mean, 9/11, I look back on that, I was in college. I was one of the few of my friends at the time who was sitting at home. And I did have the sense then of that being something quite world-changing, if not world-ending, especially, you know, I remember texting people on my little Tesco mobile at the time. Or it wouldn't even be Tesco mobile. It was certainly a Nokia. Sending messages to people and using up all my credit to tell them that, you know, something was going down and there were things happening all over the place. And I remember being that quite terrifying. That definitely shaped some of my outlook. But you know, equally, you know, some of my early work and some of my kind of consciousness now around politics was shaped by quite a quite involved obsession with far right activism. I went down some really dark holes with some of that stuff, and that still very much concerns me today. And it's been strange to see a lot of those conversations move from the fringes, where it obviously belongs, if not, you know, beyond, into the mainstream, and right up until today. You know, I was just reading just before I popped on here about some of the demonstrations planned, or counter demos, whatever you want to call them, around the cenotaph, and this kind of bad faith arguments. It's just it's a mess. So that's very much been there throughout. And then, yeah, you know, as you said, I don't really remember Thatcher's government, but I certainly remember Labour coming into power. I would have been in primary school then. I remember that sense of some great hope, which obviously slowly drained. But I would say in terms of my fiction, I think certainly those first years of austerity, the Conservative and Lib Dem coalition, and the kind of fallout from that, you know, the ongoing, I think we're still suffering the effects of that today in many, many ways. And it seems it's only going to get worse. So yeah, has my work always had an element of that anger or distress? Yes. Have I extrapolated from the worst of those policy decisions to explore what that might look like or how that might kind of come to pass? Yes. I think what I've mixed that with is probably some more surreal elements of sort of body horror or you know, kind of what to some might seem quite fanciful speculative ideas. But yeah, I do tend to mash the two together. And I think, you know, even my own kind of experiences growing up in the North, surrounded by people of all sorts of different politics, has always kind of fed in as well, you know. But again, I think the main thing is, I think the main thing that I'm preoccupied with is very much looking at so-called normal people doing normal jobs and how technology or how progress or not progress affects their day-to-day in various ways.
Yeah. That might be a good point. It's sort of the normal people doing normal jobs, to sort of talk a bit. Maybe you can introduce for listeners some of the normal people doing normal jobs that are in Lamb. It's a tricky novel to talk about too much because it really doesn't want to be spoiled.
Yeah, I mean, I think my belief is that it has to be grounded in this sense of modernity to do some of the stuff it does. But I mean, generally speaking, it centres on Boyd, this teenage lad whose life comes apart quite dramatically when his father stages a protest or terrorist attack on the firm that's making him redundant. His father's an HGV driver, a lorry driver, and I mean, in the book, he's described as a proud northern man. You know, these are quite, and I think from there it kind of spins off into an examination of both Boyd and his mother Maureen's grief and how they come to essentially enter into quite an unsettling codependent relationship in the wake of this. They move away to evade the scrutiny of the press or their friends and the kind of community that they were in Watford. They moved north to a small town. And here again, you know, their life just continues to unravel, but increasingly strange ways until Maureen, Boyd's mother, goes missing, essentially. And it's at this point that you realise that there's more going on, and that actually Boyd's parents have been concealing quite a strange secret, very dark secret from him throughout his life. But throughout all of this, he's interacting with other people from around the town. He makes friends with a similar age girl called Lee, who is working at a landfill site, trying to dig out items of some value, including hard drives that may or may not have discarded Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies on them and stuff, which is very much based on a real thing. There was a chap, I think he's in Swansea, who'd thrown away a hard drive.
I remember that story.
Yeah. So I had to use that. It was too good. And so again, they're very much, kind of people people washed up, if you like, at the edges, people who've fallen through the cracks or are about to fall through the cracks, trying to scratch a bit of a living in this kind of semi 15 minutes into the future, semi dystopian world of the book. But I also, even from there, some of the more outlandish, I suppose what you call science fiction or speculative ideas or horror ideas, even those come from, they're essentially around normal people who've been plucked from their lives and had, very ethically dubious things happen to them by the powers that be, that so to speak, sort of shadowy and not so shadowy. So all the way through the book, there's a sense of, I hope there's a sense of normality that's been corrupted in some way by external forces, external pressures. And so, these people who are trying to make do, get through this, is what the book's emotional core focuses on, if you like.
Right. Geographically, because it's a book about people and also place, and geographically, I think there's one mention of Ascension Islands, but it's very much a novel of England and of the landscape and of sort of moving through the landscape. You mentioned sort of like a road, sort of like a road trip, and your depiction of landscape is brilliant. Some passages I'm going to just read some bits that I've written down. The mothballed wind farms whose turbines stood rotting, towers and blades bronzed in the light, the last of the sun split into red points on every nacelle. These kinds of descriptions for me feel very photographic. And I wonder, as you wrote Lamb and you wrote those descriptions of the place, were you walking through the land, walking these landscapes in your mind?
Yes, I mean, for want of a better word, I think I do image these places when I write. I keep scrapbooks, notebooks, digital scrapbooks, digital notebooks of, I suppose you call them mood boards. I've never been able to articulate why, but I'm a big fan of the electricity pylon that stands in the middle of a valley surrounded by, glorious nature. But
you can never have too many pylons.
No, exactly. And that's it. It's that kind of the mash of technology, industry, post-industry, the landscape, most of which creates in me quite a melancholy sense, not least because of the onrushing catastrophes that we face in terms of climate. The climate disasters coming down the road very quickly if they aren't already here, and I think, I do. I mean, I like to take pictures anyway. I think it is about a mood. It's about an atmosphere, and I think somehow quite a lot of rural Britain, although I should probably speak more to the rural north where I am. I live right near the Pennines. I try to go walking when I can. I try to run up there, and some of those landscapes are incredibly bleak, but because of that, they're also quite evocative. And I think I do like to, the kind of cold reservoirs and, all of those places are quite moving to me. And so I like to write about them. Yeah, it's fun to describe those places. It's fun to describe the kind of how they affect your, I know you said infect, but that's probably that's true. But how they affect your inner state, psyche, all that kind of stuff. But I wouldn't say, I'm no psychogeographer. I don't have the tools to kind of speak to that stuff, but I like to paint a picture if I can. And I suppose some of those more stark images, from rotting technology to your humble pylon. They are things that I enjoy referencing, talking about in the same way, and I'm not comparing myself in any way here, but, it's like the classic Ballard with his empty swimming pools. Those images are,
Right.
they're just powerful images, aren't they?
Yeah. The concrete and the blue skies and
Exactly.
Yeah. There's something there is always something about that. But there's a great review, or a very kind of sort of thorough review by Jonathan Thornton in Fantasy Hive, and he says that he sees that you find a sense of peace and acceptance. And he also, again, I'm trying to avoid spoilers, and he also says this sort of harsh, sort of in this new modernity, we need to be able to let go of being human in order to retain our humanity, which I think is intriguing. And I'm not sure, but I wonder what you think about that.
Well, I mean, firstly, I think that was a really wonderful review of Jonathan's, and I was incredibly grateful for that, and for his sort of thoughts and insights on the novel. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because the book deals in people becoming less or more human, depending on how you want to cut it. They are, I mean, those characters themselves are forced to confront lots of different types of inhumanity, from kind of external pressures, political forces, bearing down on their family or bearing down on them personally. But then they also make connections in otherwise quite inhospitable or quite harsh environments. They make connections, they make friendships, they make relationships. And they forge bonds which are probably, as you say, could be described as humane, and through those then survive, right? Boyd goes on quite a harsh journey through which he has to enlist the help of others, and some of those people are not particularly nice. Some of those people are quite kind and generous, but don't know what to do with Boyd and what's happening to him. And so he kind of sees lots of different types of humanity, if you like. But in the end, as you say again, and without giving too much away, his closest allies are something else entirely. It's a weird one.
That's going to, hopefully, if everyone listening, if you haven't already got Lamb or have been on the fence, surely now you are. Hit by. There's a line in Lamb where a character recognizes, where Boyd recognizes some sliver of what it meant to have to care completely. Wonderful line. But how did your experience of being a father and your own feelings about being a son shape the novel? You mentioned that it's sort of generational and about parents, and I wonder certain moments did feel very true.
Well, I mean, that's wonderful to hear. I think, I mean, absolutely, my experiences as a dad, as a parent have shaped what's in the book. I'd say parenting is probably one of the biggest, parental responsibility, and that's parenting of any kind. That doesn't have to mean biological parents. That's sort of, people who look after other people, carers, unpaid carers in particular. There's all sorts of relationships out there that where this kind of vulnerability comes to life, I think, and I think, again, going back to that idea of writing from anxiety, writing from fear. Using those things and exploring those anxieties. For me, it was very much about, I suppose, talking about the kind of insane vulnerability that comes with being a parent, which I've experienced as, I mean, on twofold. I mean, sometimes I've had, the classic sort of intrusive thoughts, the idea of things happening to my boys, or the idea that, I might let them down in some way. And again, I'm being vague there maybe, but I've often felt, and I think it's quite hard to talk about this, particularly in the wider culture, because of how parenting is so reified and it's made into this kind of monolith of you must be a good parent at all times, And one of the things that I've experienced that I found quite troubling and quite hard to approach is that sometimes I've resented my children because of the sheer amount of fear and anxiety that they have generated in me. And I think maybe that's what that line's talking to, is that idea that, you have sole complete responsibility for these beings. You want to do your best by them, You're going to fail in some ways. You're going to mess things up. You're going to get things wrong. You love them entirely, but sometimes you feel as though you're not doing the best job by them. So there's many different parts of parenthood that just seem, well, completely terrifying, frankly. And I think there's always that sense as well that you've opened yourself up to the possibility of the most unimaginable loss and grief. So yeah, it's pretty heavy stuff. But I wanted to try and write about that as honestly as I could. And there are elements in the book, there are relationships in the book, which I think I've been allowed to explore some of that stuff through. But yeah, mostly it's about that. Yeah, it's about that weight of responsibility. And so while there are plenty of wonderful, wonderful things about parenting, there are also there's a darkness to some of it, which again, sometimes I think I don't know whether it's culturally or as a society or what, but I think we sometimes find it hard to talk about those things.
I agree completely. There's definitely, there are definitely things you're not supposed to say, either to your children or to people about bringing up children. But one of them is essentially, stop scaring me so much. Which is also, that beautiful thing, because it's like, thank you for surprising me so much. It's sort of that constant, that sort of what's going to happen next, which does go both ways, and
it does.
Sadly, well, not sadly, but there is definitely something cultural for sure in that we're allowed to talk about the one side, not so many opportunities to talk about the other side.
No, none.
But I do feel you.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Thanks.
Not alone at all. What's the next question? Let me think. So you've talked in the past, I can't remember where I saw this, I think it was an interview. You talked in the past about David Peace being an influence stylistically. And Nina Allen, in her review of The Breach, made a direct link to Red Riding 1974 and the line, "This is the North, we do what we want." And I thought that was a great thing for a great line for kind of Nina Allen to go back to. And I wonder, how does Peace's work resonate with you?
I mean, I wouldn't say so much now. I wouldn't say, as my style's developed, I think I'm much less imitative. Is that how you pronounce it? Of Peace. So. But certainly for The Folded Man, which was my first novel, which is 10 years old now, was hugely influenced by Peace. And certainly that Red Riding Quartet, which for me mashed together horror, the occult, with this incredibly dark period in world history, British history, certainly, with the Yorkshire Ripper and everything that was going on. But for me, certainly seemed to catch something of the North that you didn't often see represented in novels. You've got the classical is Grim Up North, and obviously sometimes the weather is grim up north. But I think certainly growing up, I'd not really been exposed to much in the way other than Coronation Street, which my mum used to watch. There didn't seem to be many cultural touch points for the North that weren't cobbles, flat caps, whippets, that kind of stuff. And there was something really harrowingly authentic about those Red Riding novels, which really, really profoundly affected me when I read them. I read them all in an incredibly fast. I read them all really quickly. My dad's a Yorkshireman, and at the time I remember going on a trip to Yorkshire after I've read them and just feeling as though I couldn't trust anybody there. It's weird, like they bled into my normal life in a really strange way. I was quite young when I read them as well. But no, I mean, even the kind of staccato style, the kind of very kind of the harshness of them, again, they're quite a glassy quality, ultra violent, ultra, just awful all around, really, but really evocative and powerful. And then from there, I've gone on to explore Gordon Burns' work, which I know Peace himself talks about being influential on his stuff. Derek Raymond's novels. I think there is something to say for British crime in that mould. And I'd say that, people like Joel Lane were writing in that kind of mode as well. Quite, well, just very harsh urban landscapes where really perverse things happen with not much oversight and not much in the way of justice. Definitely a formative influence. Definitely books that I would class as touchstones in my development as a writer, and certainly books that I think about very often. So yeah, Nina was bang on there.
And do you see yourself writing more novels in the North? Do you feel that your fiction is going to gravitate back to that, and back to that kind of urge to give a voice to the people there?
Yeah, although I'm not sure entirely. I think I do perpetuate the idea that it's grim up north. So
okay, so you need to kind of do a 180 and sort of
okay. Exactly. Do some solar punk set in Sheffield, and No, I mean the thing I'm working on now has a lot of sequences in Wales, in rural Wales, but also in Milton Keynes.
Oh, beautiful! That's wonderful.
Yeah. So it involves a lot of dash cams, and it involves a lot of again driving down small roads, trying to make sense of the world. So
okay,
yeah,
that's intriguing.
Yeah, so I think I do. I mean, I love writing about the North. It's where I grew up. It's what I know, and the anecdotes. I'm a bit of a magpie for anecdotes. They come from the North, and I include them, and I enjoy including them. It's exciting for me to do that. I do. I mean, obviously, as I mentioned earlier on, now I live on the edge of the peaks. I do have a plans for another project, which will be set on the moors. So very much taking myself out of some of the urban places, landscapes that I've been writing in. Although I think Lamb is more, I wouldn't say pastoral, but a bit more countryside. But yeah, definitely writing more to where I am now, i.e. Glossop and the surrounding areas, the Moorlands, Bleaklow and Kinderscout and those areas. So yeah, we'll see where I get to with that.
Going back to your childhood, which writers would you say made you? Which writers, which writers do you still remember reading now?
Yeah, I mean, this is interesting, isn't it? Because I think some of these writers I wouldn't necessarily say were formative influences on what I write, but I can certainly remember the experiences of them. One of my earlier memories is my grandmother reading Fantastic Mr. Fox by Roald Dahl, and being absolutely terrified of that. Certainly the sequence when he gets his tail shot off, I remember being quite upset about that. So, I mean, my gran always used to read to us, and I think that was those memories are pretty wonderful. In the same way, I remember my grandfather handed me a copy of John Fowles' The Magus and saying, "You need to go."
Oh wow!
Yeah. And I was probably I don't know how old I was, in my late teens when he did that, and he said, "Yeah, go and read. You need to go and read that," and I did. And I remember that being quite an amazing experience. I grew up reading, Tolkien, Enid Blyton. I read a lot of comics. I was obsessed with Thunderbirds for a while. Well, I say a while, it was more than a while, but I used to read a lot of the Thunderbirds comics. Who else? Certainly as I came into understanding what SF was and could do, Michael Marshall Smith, I wrote an essay for Tor.com a good few years ago about Only Forward and how important that was to me as a novel. Because it was the first time I'd come across a writer, a novelist writing something for which there was no budget. It was an unlimited budget, should I say, and just doing whatever the hell he wanted. And I found that absolutely mind blowing at the time. It's an incredible novel for that. Ian Banks, I devoured all the culture novels. They were pretty special to me. Again, going back to David Peace. And then, it's cheating a little bit. But for me, a lot of my really formative things were games. I grew up playing a lot of games and probably developing a sense of storytelling more through that than through anything else, actually.
Oh, that's really interesting. Which games?
I mean, if I think back on it now, I'd have to say things like Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time, right the way through to some of the more genius stuff more recently. Titanfall, Portal, and then right through to now, things like I can never remember the names of them when I need to remember them, but there's a developer, one of the games that it produced was called Inside, and there's a few sort of these indie developers just doing really sort of innovative things with games and narrative, which are always exciting and fresh to play in a way, and completely unconstrained in the way that fiction sometimes is. So I do feel inspired by that, and I do feel inspired by the way that people are using different mediums to tell stories and play around with stories or subvert stories. I was playing Destiny 2 for a good while, and some of the lore and some of the backstories to not only the characters but things like the weapons in Destiny are insanely well crafted and intricate. And for the most part, I'm not playing those games to enjoy the stories, but I always appreciate the craft that goes into them.
Yeah.
Another game that I think of as Deus Ex, the original Deus Ex game, which again had those branching possibilities and quite novelistic sort of. It was quite a text-heavy game with a lot of. At the time, it felt very innovative. I certainly remember playing that when I was quite young, and yeah, it's funny seeing how that stuff spins out. And in fact, I think I absorbed most of the cyberpunk canon through games rather than through literature. I didn't read Snow Crash or Neuromancer till I was quite old, or quite a bit older than I could have read those things. But I think I absorbed a lot of their ideas through games like Deus Ex. So it's almost like I've kind of, I enjoy cyberpunk stuff. I enjoy the aesthetic. I enjoy some of the ideas it explores, some of the kind of more transgressive, subversive ideas it plays around with.
The next question I was going to ask you was, what do you read for pleasure versus maybe also what do you read for inspiration, or is there no boundary?
Yeah, no, I try to read as broadly as I can. I try to keep up with the field. I've been lucky enough to make friends, other writer friends whose work I always enjoy reading. Most recently I've started Martin McKin's In Ascension, which is so far annoyingly good. really, really, really good. And I'm looking forward to getting back to that. Obviously, it's been a busy couple of weeks with the book coming out and stuff, but beyond that, I recently read as well. It's another Dead Ink title, actually, Right in the Future, which was edited by Dan Coxon and Richard V. Hurst. That's a continuation of the series they started with Writing the Uncanny, which I think was out the year before last. Just a collection of really thoughtful essays on the fantastic political, personal, in search of meaning, if you like. And some really standout stuff in that collection. A great state of the nation look at contemporary SF, where it's going, where it might go. What else? I also read, and I think you've had to take her on the show, actually, Take Maria Smith's Umbilical.
Yes.
Which is a really genre fluid collection, kind of remixes, reworks, lots of classic fairy tales, myths. And again, that's another collection that I think uses the mundane and the weird to fantastic effect, the shift between them. And Taker's writing is beautiful as well.
Yeah. The November Room, or Leaving the Labyrinth, is in IZ Digital. And that blending of those domestic moments and the incredibly, you mentioned sort of, stories without budgets.
Yeah.
Yeah, remarkably good. And her collection, Umbilical, is out now from Newcom Press.
That's right, yeah. There's a few images from that collection that have really stuck with me. But yeah, as you say, the November Room is definitely a highlight, as is the title story, which is only 3 pages long, but that packs a real wallop. And then I was very lucky to read a copy of Aaliyah Whiteley's new novel, which comes out early next year. It's called 381 from Solaris. It's a kind of weird literary hero's journey, and told quite self-consciously in that mode. But it has this extra kind of smart idea, conceit, if you like, of the main text is being analysed by a future archivist or academic who's leaving their commentary in the footnotes of the novel. So you have this kind of really strange sense of you have two narratives going on at the same time. One in the main body, if you like, and one in the footnotes. And the story that's happening in the footnotes is completely informed by what's happening in the main story. And it's just a wonderful novel.
That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, for me, Aaliyah's best work, and that's saying something. So yeah, I'm excited for Aaliyah for that to come out, because I think it's a really special book, and I'm very excited to see, in the same way that I was talking earlier about working out what your books are about. I'm excited to read and see other people discussing their interpretations of it, because it's super dense with meaning and ideas, and actually takes on a weirdly, almost what would you call it? Almost kind of religious aspect.
I'm a huge fan of Aaliyah Whiteley. The short fiction, I think she's one of the greatest sort of working writers of short fiction at the moment. I think she's incredibly good. And so yeah, I'm excited. I have the new novel on the Kindle, and I've been it's one of those ones that I've been saving, because I know that it's going to have a lot in it, and I need to have my brain in gear.
Yeah, I'd say you definitely do. I mean, it's quite a short novel. It packs a lot into quite a short space. But again, there's some images from that one which have really stuck with me. It also has, in the same way that much of Leah's work has, quite a sly humour about it, which I really enjoy. It's playful as well as quite affecting. It does a lot, and I'd say get on that as soon as you can. It's great.
Okay.
I mean, the only other book I was going to mention was Sarah Hall's Burnt Coat, which I think came out 21, maybe 22. It's all blurred into one now, the last 3 years. But I found that a really compelling take on the pandemic. I mean, I think it was written during, certainly being written during 2020. Very kind of, odd, sensual. I mean, it's really quite sexy, actually, in a kind of a lot of ways, but it's totally spellbinding. And again, I love Sarah Hall's short fiction for the same reasons we were discussing earlier around vagueness and things being left unsaid and all that kind of stuff. That was a cracking novel. And in the same way, we talked about Nina Allen. Her latest Conquest also has some really amazing stuff around the pandemic and responses to the pandemic, and some of the kind of ideas around truth and storytelling that have kind of sprung up around all of that stuff. There's loads of good stuff.
So many good things. Yeah, Conquest I think is out in paperback maybe soon. I feel like I saw a new cover. The paperback cover is completely different to the hardback cover. So I guess that must be out fairly soon, if it isn't already out. Although those are great recommendations. The last question I have was about because I think you signed a multi-book deal with Dead Ink, and I wondered, sort of where are you going to be taking readers next, and what do you want to tell?
So I've got another book. Very happily, I have another book contracted with them, which is due for publication, I think, in 2025. So this is the project that's, a lot of it is set in London and Milton Keynes. It's a tricky one. I think, to me, I'm right. It's quite linearly told, which is new for me. A lot of my stuff jumps around and chops between different characters. It follows one character through a kind of terrible, by which I mean terribly hot summer. Again, it could be now, it could be a couple of years in the future. That doesn't really matter. But it follows this character on a journey, I suppose, of he is trying to atone for something that he's done. And it follows his attempts to do that, some of which are more successful than others. It's very much in flux, actually, the project. It's been drafted. I'm doing the redraft at the moment. I don't really know what I think about it. It's completely different to Lamb, which may count in its favour or not. So we'll see. But But in the same way, you know, it has some strange stuff going on there. And I'm almost reluctant to say it, but I think it has a thread of paranormal, which is something I've not done before.
Okay.
Playing around with kind of hauntings, stroke ghosty stuff, but not. And the great temptation is to make it is that actually happening, or is it all in a character's head? And I don't want that to be the question at the end of it. I want it to fall one way or the other. But I have learned over the last few novels that there are risks. You end up taking risks like that. There's stuff around dreams in it, for instance, and you know, the prevailing sense is that you don't do dream sequences in novels because people find them boring. So I'm like, is there a way to make a dream sequence interesting? And that's what I'm currently grappling with. So yeah.
Right. Anytime there's like a piece of conventional wisdom that says you shouldn't do X, Y, or Z, I kind of think, well, oh, okay. Really?
Yeah.
I'll show you.
Exactly. I am motivated by spite, so I'll give that a go and see what happens.
Wow, that was really, really good, and really we covered lots of different things. Lamb is out now, and you do need a copy of this, particularly if you're kind of interested in the very sort of cutting edge of where speculative fiction is. So please buy that. Thank you, Matt Hill. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's been brilliant.
You've been listening to Interzone Pod. My name is Gareth Jelley, and my guest today was Matt Hill. Find out more about Interzone at interzone.press and read stories, reviews, and interviews for free at Interzone's online sister zine, IZ Digital. Thanks for listening.